Do we build one-on-ones next? Do we build an announcement tool? Do we build surveys? Do we build a daily stand-up tool that hyper focuses on that one thing? Well, we couldn't get conviction on anything else. So Josh Purvis, who's our CPO and co-founder, had this idea to take a form, like a normal form, like a survey form, but a form manipulated in a different way can do 1,000 different things, can do 1,000,000 different things. The permutations, each new form block you add can create all these different use cases. And so a form, when it goes out, when people respond to it, if the form comes back into a social feed, you really have a lot of potential. So instead of building one thing at a time and going deep into any one category, what we ended up doing is taking recognition, which was our core product at the time, breaking it down to its core components, which was a form. Who do you want to recognize? Do you want to give them points? What do they do? Tie it to a core value. That is literally answering fields in a form. So we took that form and said, you can do all these things. So we built out hundreds of culture templates with this form. And we said, let the companies tell us what they want by giving them all these options. And some of the options can range from surveys. It could be anonymous surveys, an anonymous suggestion box. It could be one-on-ones. And we can not only create forms, but we can automate the cadence to which people are notified to respond to the forms. So you can send them to departments or locations or individuals. So one-on-ones started to be really popular. People started using us for company announcements. Ugly sweater contests during the holidays, because we have a reward system where you can submit the responses, vote on it, and then reward people. The use cases were wild. And what we found is each use case another company turns on. If you turn on another use case and another use case, a normal HR experience when you use a product is you get a high adoption rate and then it declines over time. That is pretty common. It's like, I can't imagine anyone's ever said, I can't wait to do my annual review, said by no one ever. But with Assembly, when we turned on recognition, when they turned on surveys, when they turned on social channel, like a pets channel where people can upload photos of their pets or dogs or whatever it might be, the more features we added, what we ended up seeing was doubling of participation and often tripling of participation every 12 months. So people kept coming back to the platform more and more, so that when you wanted them to give recognition, they were doing it with higher frequency. When you wanted them to answer a survey, they were already in the platform because their social elements lived there. Their friends were in it. Instagram, I think the magic number was like get 7 of your friends to, or Facebook, get 7 of your friends to join, and then you're hooked forever. It's the same thing with our workflows. The more workflows you turn on, the more reasons there are to engage, the more collaboration and community you have. And so that was our path to getting massive adoption from a user perspective.
Yeah, I think that's smart. Like building templates for forms has got to be a lot easier than building deep features in a whole bunch of areas. And so were you building templates for everything, or were you building kind of like a no-code form that they could customize and use however they wanted, and you weren't being too rigid about the use cases?
Both. So we have the ability to create a customized form however you want. We have a bunch of different blocks and all the different permutations of the blocks, literally give you millions of options. But we do have templates, and most people ended up adopting the templates because what we ended up seeing is when someone adopted something new, if we saw a couple people do this thing, they're like, oh, I'm creative. We ended up just templatizing it and adding it to our template library. That's how most of our templates came to be. Like we see people do it, and so we just templatized it.
That's very interesting. Let's talk a little bit about sales. One of the challenges that I think with a product like Assembly, and we were chatting about this a little earlier, is this whole the whole dynamics of like a buyer versus a user. You want to obviously focus on the buyer when you're selling the product because they're the decision maker, they've got the budget, and they've got their own set of goals in terms of what they want to get out of the product. But those goals may not, and quite often don't, align with the goals of the people who are using the product. And the problem is that you might be able to sell Assembly to HR folks, but if you're not also thinking about how to create usage and engagement with employees who actually want to go in there, you can't force them, to use this thing. But if they're not using it, then at the end of the day, it's going to be like, well, it doesn't really work. So you've got this situation here where you've got to figure out how you can drive engagement, how you can make it easier, more incentives for the employees. But none of those things are that important to the buyer who is probably, well, maybe it is, but they maybe have other priorities as well. So what was your experience there, and how did you overcome those sorts of challenges?
Love this question, and we can go super deep into this one. But my advice to the entrepreneurs out there thinking and ideating on their business, if you can align the buyer and the user as close as possible, you really reduce the levels of friction. Because if they're totally detached, a buyer might want something different, as you said eloquently, than the user itself, which is why, like consumer products, you're the buyer and the user. So it's like, I want this thing, I'm going to buy it. And it's like, you don't have to convince a separate person to do the thing. It's you're doing it. So the closer you can align that, and there's a lot of, even in the B2B SaaS world, there's a lot of platforms and tools that do that, in which case the purchasing intent, the decision-making power is much faster because the buyer is the user. It affects that person directly. We sell into HR, and that is difficult. Who is your HR buyer? It might be an office admin who's climbed the ranks, who has this idea and this notion of what engagement platforms should be. But then there's the user, which is dynamically detached. There's a huge dichotomy between a buyer and a user. So if you just listen to an admin, they might say, I want these beautiful charts and graphs. I want this crazy reporting. I want this functionality and this automation and that. And the truth is, some of that is absolutely valuable and would make the world of difference. But a lot of it, we look at the data, it doesn't make sense. It's like you can build out the most beautiful reporting in the world, but if people don't use it, what's the difference? And so you have to actually blend when the buyer is different than the user. What do the users want, and how do you bring value to the user? And how do you keep the admin happy? How do you keep the buyer of this platform engaged enough so that they can renew, that they'll tell their friends, that they'll be like, I'm going to get promoted because I drove this, I crushed this out of the park. How do you make them so good at implementing a tool that they get poached to the next company? Those are the kind of tools that make you feel amazing in an organization. So blending those two is really difficult. And it's something that we've struggled with. There's a push and pull between, I'm sure this is not unique to assembly, but between product and sales. Sales, if you listen to the buyer, it's like, this is what I need, reporting. And, product focus, like, look at the analytics of what the people are doing. Let's double down on those features and let's make it even easier and simpler and add more features to make this more automated for an employee. It's a really tough conundrum to be in, and you have to navigate those waters.
So give me one example of what you did for the admin, the buyer, to make them feel like a hero for choosing and buying Assembly.
I hate to say this the way that I'm about to say this, but by not listening to the buyer, we made them a hero. There's a whole new breed of HR, like a chief people officer. The title of people is something relatively new. It just used to be HR manager, chief human resource officer, and now this people title is coming out. And after, COVID on, the emphasis on it has been great. It's been vast. And so how do you make them look like a hero? You launch a product that employees will love, that if you ask, if you took this away, would you be upset? And if people said yes, then it's like, okay, this is a win for my organization. And so by listening to the user, by understanding the data and interviewing the actual end user of the product, more so than the admin, we were able to build features where our utilization and productivity inside the platform would double or triple in terms of participation over a year period, where most HR tools are declining in participation dramatically. But once again, you still have to keep them happy. You do have to build some forms of reporting. You have to make it presentable so they can showcase the results to the CEO and the whatever titles are out there that they need to showcase the results to. So you do need to blend it. But I would say the best thing we did was listen to the user.